Well, welcome to the show, AD Robles. Nice to have you with us, buddy.
Awesome. Whenever you start recording on Zoom, it always flashes on the screen that you're recording, and it gives you two options. It says "Got it" or "Leave the meeting." So in case there's someone on the call, it's like I don't want to be recording,
Okay, so he's out. It's just gonna be
so
me.
I'm in. No, I
Oh, he's
clicked
in.
"Got it."
Okay, he's in. Well, yeah, glad to have you with us, man. Why don't you just briefly tell those who may not know who you are, just kind of who are you? Where do you live? Maybe what kind of church you at?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm obviously I'm AD Robles. My name is Adam, actually, and you can
Yeah.
call me Adam or AD. Doesn't matter. And Most people know me because I started a YouTube channel, 6, 7 years ago about like the woke church stuff. And At the time, I was one of the very few people that were talking about it. So I got a little bit of traction with that. I never really intended on being a YouTuber, but I've been doing it ever since, and I really enjoy it, and it's awesome. So I live in New Hampshire, and I go to like a local. It's a kind of a Baptisty church, but it's really more of a community church in my town. And Yeah, I mean, YouTube is not my business. I also kind of do normal work as well.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about me. I also have a podcast on the Fight Laugh Feast network. So if you ever subscribe
Mhm.
to the Fight Laugh Feast feeds, I have a podcast on there that runs about once a week, whenever I get to it, kind of thing.
And I some people who watch this probably have heard of Cross Politic.
Yeah, that's the main show on the Fight Laugh Feast network, yeah.
Yeah.
So they used to be their own show just kind of independently, and then a few years back, they decided to have, like, a network of podcasts that would all be affiliated. So Cross Politic is, like, the main, like, the anchor show, and then there's a bunch of, little guys like me that are also on there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do have a fair, I would say, fairly large kind of YouTube following. I don't know about the podcast thing, but it's like it's not like you're, you know, little me over here. You've been on
Yeah,
for a while, so
I
uh,
guess it's all relative.
yeah, yeah. To me, like it's kind of a lot, but it is kind of all relative. But
Yeah.
I'll start here. This interview, for anyone who ends up watching this, it is all about basically doing work and thinking economically in kind of a Christian way. And I wanted to interview AD because he's talked some about that on his channel before. But I want to start off a little bit lighter. And
Let's
so I
do it.
wanted to ask you, AD, for those who might watch this who have actually seen you before, are you aware of how funny you actually are?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. When I was the best man at my brother's wedding, he had a really nice things to say about me. And one of the things he said was that I was the funniest person he knew. To be honest, I get a lot of my humor from my brother, so it was kind of cool to hear him say that. But yeah, I'm aware. And I'm intentionally doing it, and
Okay, okay.
I try to talk about issues that I think are serious, but in a more, cheerful kind of a way, which I think, can be disarming at times. And some people really don't like it, but tough.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Well, yeah,
appreciate that though. Thank you for saying that.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, I've not seen every last thing, of course, you've ever put or produced or whatever. 'Cause you have a lot of videos and stuff, but I
Yeah.
catch a decent bit here and there. Maybe not as much as I once did, but like there was one time in a recent video I saw you, and I was driving, which was not a good idea because like you said something really funny. Like you like shrieked at the top of your lungs, like pretending you were like, I'm a pagan or something. I
Yeah,
almost
yeah,
ran
yeah.
off the road. Like,
Yeah, well, hey, that's a good tip for you, everyone listening. If you do listen, maybe make sure you're not driving.
do not listen to AD Robles while driving. I'll tell you that. One more lighter thing. You have referred to yourself. You're the self-proclaimed reasonable Latino. I wanted to hear where was the origin of that? Was that from YouTube? Like, did that kind of just did someone call you that and you're like, that's kind of funny?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like, I used to hear from early on that I was very much unreasonable.
Okay.
And I always was at the beginning of my content. If you watch, I mean, you mentioned you haven't seen everything. Well, that if you had, I'd be a little weirded out. There's like over 1,000 videos, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at my like earlier, my first year or two, I bend over backwards to be reasonable,
Yep.
and then that kind of changed over time. I guess I've seen too much now, so I'm not bending over backwards to like be nice or whatever. Anyway, so a lot of people continue to say I was unreasonable or crazy or an idiot or whatever. So I just say that just kind of like, I mean, I think I'm pretty reasonable, so
Yeah.
I'm the reasonable Latino. Because a lot of Latinos aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always found it to be a funny little like I don't know, self-proclaimed
Yeah,
thing, but I figured it was something like that because
yeah,
yeah, it's funny. I mean, for those who have not really heard of AD Robles or seen any of your videos or anything, like you kind of mentioned at the beginning, we'll get into the meat of the interview, but basically you were a somewhat like prominent in terms of little guys
yeah, yeah, yeah,
voice in terms of when wokeness was a lot more front lines and it was the acceptable position that everyone who is a Christian
yep,
has to be woke, even though it was
yeah,
sinful. You were one that was like to some degree exposing it. And
yeah.
so for if people don't know much about AD Robles, that's kind of where the whole YouTube thing started. So
Yeah, and
um
and we were just talking right before we started recording about John Harris. He was doing it too. And I think that I was doing it a little earlier than him, and he actually found me and reached out to me, and we kind of
okay.
sparked up a friendship there. And but there were very few people doing it, and so I don't want to take credit for anything, but I'm very glad to sort of be like the guy that everybody hates at first, and then it builds confidence in others to sort of start talking about this. And I definitely think I played a part in that. Um, and I'm glad to do that because I think that for whatever reason I don't mind being hated if that makes sense. Like I don't like it,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
don't like when people
Yeah.
say awful things about me, but I don't mind it so much. My prayers for my wife because she does not like that at all. Uh, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was funny. We were at the Fight Laugh Feast conference just the other day, like a month ago, and she was we had a chance to meet Doug Wilson, and she was talking to him about the influence they've had on her to like how to deal with when everybody hates your husband. Yeah, him and his wife,
Is that right? Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
been
So
tougher
there
on her than me, but I'm okay with
yeah.
that, and here we are.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fun. I'm sure that was a fun and fruitful conference. So,
Yeah, yeah, it
um
was.
definitely have heard much and seen a decent bit of Doug Wilson. So, saw him he's on a video where he's like making stuff on fire recently or something. So,
Yeah, yeah, he
that's
does that every year. Yep.
that
And
actually looks really cool.
yeah, and he's another one of these guys that for whatever reason, like the way he's just, his temperament and everything like that, he's really good under fire. He doesn't mind being, pilloried and hated. And his wife over time has had to learn how to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've read a book by John MacArthur, just 12 Ordinary Men,
Yeah.
and an analyzation biblically of the 12 different disciples and their personalities. We obviously know way more about Peter, John, James than we do about some of the more minor ones that are, but like the point
Sure.
of the book was God uses different types of people and it's not our own
Oh,
strength.
amen.
So there's Peters, but then there's Andrews who kind of point someone to a Peter. And it's like, whatever Doug is, I don't know too much about him, but like he has a certain level of strengths that God has given him and
Oh,
giftings
amen.
that not everyone
I
can do
talk
it.
about this. This is so cool because I talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And actually, if you're watching this anywhere close to November 2nd, on November 2nd, I just uploaded a video about this exact topic. Um, because everyone has different strengths and weaknesses and abilities and there's natural giftings. And so not everybody's going to be willing or able to take fire as much as someone like Doug will.
Yeah.
And but you got to be grateful for that because
Yeah.
sometimes it takes the heat off regular people, and there's other skills needed as well. There's a lot of skills for people that are just trying to keep the peace, like that's okay too.
Yeah.
there's fighters, there's all kinds of different things. And I think, yeah, actually, I'll probably have to pick up that book. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, no, 12 Ordinary Men, and I've overall, like, spiritual kind of grandfather, John MacArthur. Like,
Yeah,
whether
he's
you
great.
agree with everything he's ever said,
Yeah.
it's like the cloth that he is cut from spiritually. It's like if I have 1/10 of his backbone,
Mm,
spiritually, like I'll be a happy man.
yeah. Yeah, he's a great guy. I'm a big fan.
Okay, so getting more into what I wanted to talk about, you have said something along the lines of before of what I've seen of you, that essentially for Christians, the Bible is so much better than we have been sold or told. You've said that something
Amen.
along those lines. The Bible's so
Many
much
times,
better.
yeah.
And so, in terms of thinking of that in terms of economics, I guess what did you mean by that phrase in general? And then how might that apply toward Christian work and thinking of taking dominion and working in the economic realm?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So what I meant by that is that typically, when we're listening to sermons that we like or we're reading books, from the main guys, you're gonna get a very clear gospel presentation, and they'll explore it in different ways, and they'll get a lot about God, about the Trinity, all of these like central kind of high doctrines, and those are all important. The doctrines of grace, if you're a Calvinist, if you're not a Calvinist, you probably don't like that as much,
Yeah.
but you get all that kind of stuff, like really high theology. And that's all wonderful, and it's all central, and it's stuff that we should understand and we should care about. But what I meant by that is that it also, though, applies to just like your daily life in a lot more detail, in a lot more meaningful way than I think sometimes our leaders
Mm,
sell it. Because you always get the tip of the hat, right? Like the gospel should affect every area of your life and look to Jesus in every area of your
okay.
life. You don't get a whole lot, though, in my opinion, of really practical ways that it does. And
Mm,
I think that the Bible has a lot more of that to offer than a lot of people give it credit for. So that's what I mean. Um, Not everybody is called to be a pastor, right?
true.
We
Yeah.
get that. We get that. Most people have other kinds of jobs, and that's not to say that the pastor's job is not special and unique in many ways.
Yeah.
But the reality is, most people are plumbers. Most people, have an office job. Most people are software programmers, whatever the case may be, construction workers. Um, and those things are necessary for life.
Yeah.
And I believe that the Bible has a lot to say about how you conduct yourself in those ways, how you should work, and how the way your demeanor should be when you work, the kind of quality of work that you do.
Mm,
Um, it should not be a drudgery, because it's
yeah.
something that pretty much all work has dignity. Obviously, except for immoral things.
Yeah.
Um, but and so I think that sometimes we kind of treat people with our teaching as if, yeah, sure, you're a plumber, but really what matters is the stuff that the pastors should be doing. So they should be studying the high doctrines and getting a good 2 hours of deep study every day in the Bible. Well, that's not really realistic for plumbers, and it's not really
Gotcha.
necessary for plumbers. They're not pastors typically. Um, so that's kind of what I meant by that. And if we want to explore that, maybe have some questions, I'd be glad to.
Yeah, yeah. So just the dignity of all work, and statistically, even just statistically, most Christians for all time, will not be pastors. Like
Yeah, and
I don't know
that's
what it is,
necessary, and that's
95%.
good. And that's good, because the thing is, like, and we keep talking about Doug Wilson here. I don't know how it keeps coming up, but one of the things that they're doing in his town in Moscow, Idaho, is that their goal is to make that a Christian town, right? That's their goal. And I've never been there, but from what I understand, when you go to Moscow and you go on the main drag of the center of town, you can point to like business after business after business that's all run by Christians.
Yeah.
And so there's Christian coffee shops, there's Christian, I don't know, supply stores, various kinds of businesses. And in order to have a functioning town, if you're going to have a Christian town, you're going to need to have a Christian everything. You know what I mean? Like you need to
Yeah.
have a functioning place. obviously, we understand that, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. But
Yeah.
men need bread too. You know what I mean? They need
Yeah.
other things too. Um, yeah.
I heard, well, I talked to a guy, a pastor named Michael Cleary, recently,
Okay.
and he has a book called God's Good Design, and it's about basically an overarching view of just men and women and human sexuality. And he said something that I think falls in line with some of what you're saying. He says like the gospel, it's our salvation, but it does not overturn nature or like natural
Amen. Yeah, that's a big thing.
affections.
Yep.
So yeah, like it can be very easy to just view everything as I have been redeemed, and so now I can just take my hands off the wheel of doing good work and taking some sort of dominion and taking some sort of action, and I can just kind of take my hands off the wheel until my day comes,
Yeah.
like an escapist rather than
Yeah.
honoring God in the here and now, and building an inheritance for your children or
And
helping
and
lead the
that's the
church
key.
for.
In a lot of examples, that's the real key, right? Because most people don't live their life with their tickets punched and I'm just going to coast to the rest of life. Most people work, and they build businesses and things like that.
Yeah,
But I think like if you have your mind on what the Bible says there, exactly that, leaving an inheritance to your children's children. Um, I think a lot of people that worked really hard their whole lives would, and maybe they started a business or something, they would kind of change what the end game is for that, right? Because a lot of guys, they'll start a business, they'll be successful, and then they'll sell it and retire.
yeah,
Um, well, if you're thinking, more generationally, and that's a great verse. You might operate your business in a different way, where it's like, okay, I'm going to build this business, and then I'm going to pass it off to my children, and they're going to have it, and then their children's children are going to have it, and we're going to
yeah.
build, an empire here. I think if more Christians thought that way, we'd be in a different place than we are right now. So, the when you're not thinking about that, and you got your ticket punch kind of thing, it's not like you stop working hard. A lot of people still work hard,
Yeah,
but they work differently and they plan differently.
I
So that's a perfect example that you just brought up, because that's one way economically that the church would be in a better place, I think, if people had been doing this, for a long time. They
absolutely.
used to do this.
There's a lot there. I think as you're talking, just the difference in terms of viewpoint on what we're working toward. And ultimately, we are glorifying the Lord in our work, and part of that glorifying the Lord is in why we're working, and that is I am building something for the betterment of my children to provide
Yep.
for them. It's just fascinating to think about in our culture. Birth rate is declining,
Yeah.
marriage is declining. All these things, all the basic realities of living in God's world are
Yep.
under attack and they're backwards and everything. But Christians have this opportunity to live in light of God's rules and see good results come.
Yep.
You've thought a lot about these things, but I've just kind of it's an exciting sort of thing just to think about
Yep.
in terms
Well,
of.
what most people say and do, because this is the thing, I've heard that verse preached on many times in my life. And what you
Mhm.
typically get is, again, a tip to the hat of what the plain meaning of the text is, an actual inheritance of actual physical material goods. And
Yeah,
you say the real inheritance is passing, the beliefs and the faith to the next generation. And there's truth there. That
yeah,
is important. If you're leaving a great business to your son, but he turns out a pagan, that doesn't do anyone any good.
yeah. He'll just
But
ruin it.
well, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, and in fact, the Bible teaches that. But the thing is, though, what ends up happening when you do that, all you do is tip the hat to the actual inheritance.
yeah,
It's not balanced. You know what I mean? Like you said, yeah, eh, the natural is real, but and then the spiritual things are real too. And so that's a perfect example of exactly what I mean. It's like usually you get the tip to the hat, but that's actually the pure meaning of the text. That's what they meant. And of course it applies to spiritual things too, so you can't forget those. But it affects the here and now as well, and even even more primarily.
Yeah. And when you speak about these sorts of things in terms of, looking toward the future, providing inheritance for your children, and just like the dignity that's found in work. We know that work is pre-fall. Adam and Eve, God instilled it in them. It is a part of
Y-
being made in God's image, is taking dominion and reflecting Him.
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
post-fall too, though it's tainted with the effects of sin, thorns and thistles. But are there places in the Bible, maybe New Testament, but I'm probably thinking more Old Testament, that you have felt as you've kind of looked at the Old Testament and you think, oh, this is really instructive on general rules about living in terms of work and economics and building an inheritance and those kind of
Mhm.
things? Is there any place in scripture that you kind of go to?
Yeah, yeah, there's a bunch. So, the first thing I'll say is you need to know the law of God.
Hmm.
So Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, these are all some of these books are books that like adults don't even read sometimes. And if they
Yeah.
do, it's kind of like they zip through it. Hey, I'm out of that context now.
Many
But
annual reading plans have stopped in the book of Leviticus.
yeah, that's right. That's right. But Leviticus is the book that Jesus quotes more than any other book. So
Hmm.
it might be Deuteronomy, but you know what I mean. So like
But he's always looking back to the Torah.
always, always. And so that's you should resist the urge to do that because there's so much that directly applies to our lives today. So it's not that divorced from our context as we might think it is. But also, even the stuff that isn't, there's a lot of good stuff there. And
Yeah.
so, read that and then find some books that actually take that law seriously and can explain some of it because some of it does need explanation. I'm not saying it's easy reading necessarily. Um, and I can give you recommendations on that if you want. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. If
but
you have
and
any.
then yeah, well, the one that was most helpful to me is by R.J. Rushdoony. It's called The Institutes of Biblical Law. Um, it's not, you can't, not everything in that book is correct in my opinion, but
Yeah.
it's so thorough and it's referenced and it's, you can just, if it even has like a scripture glossary in the back where, oh man, what does Leviticus, 24:3 mean? And you could find it in there and where he talks about it and stuff. It's good stuff. And then the other place I would go is the Proverbs for sure. So I've been reading the
Mm,
Proverbs to my kids. I've got four sons, 8 and under, and there's just so much
yeah.
there about working and different strategies. Even just this evening, I was reading one that said that a wise man, goes out to the field, gathers all his like materials, and only then builds the house. And
Yeah.
it's like we were talking about like why would that be with my kids, and they had some interesting ideas. But even that, it's just like, yeah, a wise man plans things out first,
Yeah.
make sure he has what he needs, and then get started on the hard work. Like it's not haphazard. Like if you're gonna do something, if you're gonna build a business or you're gonna build anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You should do it with careful thought ahead of time. By the way, when I was reading that, I was like, Jesus says that too. He
Yeah.
also says
Yeah.
the same thing, and so I'm certain that Jesus had these proverbs in mind.
Yeah.
I haven't looked in. I was going to look that up later to see if
That's
anyone else has said
fascinating
that, but
thought,
it
though.
sounds like probably he did. But there's stuff like that. There's so much stuff like that in the Proverbs that is very, very helpful, very instructive, very easy to understand. That's the good thing about the Proverbs. They're very easy to read, unlike Leviticus. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, those are the two areas I would say
Mm.
in the Old Testament that would be the best. Also, some of the stories as well are very instructive. Like I was one of my favorites, and if you've watched me, maybe you've heard me talk about Ezra and Nehemiah.
A little
And
bit, yeah.
yeah, so the story with Ezra and Nehemiah is, they're both the books are both about the same time, but from different perspectives. So Ezra
Yeah.
is the priest; he's the man of the cloth, and then Nehemiah, he's a layman, and but they're accomplishing the same things. They're trying to rebuild Jerusalem, right? The walls of the city and
Yeah.
all that. And it's what's so instructive about that is it shows you that even though you have the same goal, people are going to handle it differently and have different roles.
Yeah.
And the one example I always use is just so great. is Ezra hears that the children of Israel are intermarrying, right? They're marrying pagan women.
Yep.
And when Ezra hears about this, the text says that he pulls his hair out and it says he sits appalled for hours
Yeah.
and he's praying and he's just appalled, right?
Yep.
And so that's how Ezra handled it. Nehemiah tells the same story. And so Ezra, he's praying to God, do something about this. And then Nehemiah hears of it in his book, and he doesn't do what Ezra did.
Yeah.
Instead, Nehemiah hears about it, and it says that he pulls their beards out, the people that are doing it, and he beats them, and he makes them swear that they're going to stop doing this. You're not going to have your sons marry pagans anymore.
Yep.
So two different men talking about the same topic, two totally different approaches.
Yeah.
And I could just see
But
this.
both men of God and both within the will of God and helpful to people.
Absolutely, God commends them
Yeah.
both, and I could just see the modern kind of school marmish type, condemning Nehemiah for his unchristlike behavior and stuff like that. When in actuality, what happened there is Ezra was scandalized. He prayed about it, and God answered his prayer by
Mhm.
sending this governor essentially to come and
Yeah.
crack some skulls, and he did, and they stopped. You know what I mean? So, um, that's very instructive to me because it's like, okay, so we can have a team of people that are different in their styles and their approaches and their duties. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be unbecoming of a priest, a man of the cloth, to be doing stuff like that, but
Yeah.
a governor could, and he should. And so that stuff, like even the stories that you read, you can get stuff from them that'll be helpful in your everyday life.
Yep. That is
I identify with Nehemiah very much because he's a layman and he seems like my kind of guy where it's like I'm going to take some action here. But you need the Ezras too because without the Ezras, sometimes you don't even get the Nehemiahs, but you also do need the Ezras to sort of rein in people from time to time
yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're dynamic, and Ezra too, to my knowledge, was an expert in the law of God, and so taught people the law of God as well. And the helpful thing to me about just those two as an example is they were both on the same team, like
That's right.
ultimately. And so when I think about even just applying that kind of dynamic to the local church, it's
Oh
like
yeah.
we have the priesthood of all believers, we have pastors, we have a diaconate, we have some people that lead this ministry, some that just help, some do this, but it's like God needs softer tempered people. He needs
Oh
more
amen.
aggressive type people that are, aggressive for the Lord's sake and just all of that. Um, so yeah, I 100% agree on the that's a good point, that dynamic. I
Yeah,
think
and it
applies
also.
to today's debates, by the way, like in
Oh,
terms of controversial issues,
absolutely.
like Ezra's, who are on the right team, so to speak. Like they see an evil and they are going to the Lord about it. And they're also speaking. They might not be as forceful or whatever, but they're still doing their best to speak on issues
That's right.
or at least platform the person that does or listen to the person that does. That's like a helpful thing. And they have to
Oh
recognize
yeah.
that sometimes, hey, I'm glad that there's this Nehemiah over here.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
vice versa. Like it's more about the team rather than, yeah,
You know
I
what I
guess
think
same.
about too a lot, and this is another thing that from the stories that you get. Oftentimes in the stories, you'll get, the it's about the main guy. So like the Nehemiah is about Nehemiah. He's the governor. He's kind of the leader and
Yeah.
all of that. What I like to also think about too is what's behind all that. So Nehemiah had a lot of guys with him that
Yeah.
were like bricklayers and they were
Yeah.
cutting wood and they were making the masonry concrete or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I like to think about those guys too because those guys are part of that story. We don't get to hear their names, but they're there and they're all doing this. They're all accomplishing the same thing. They're all going after the same goal. And
Yeah.
without those guys, Nehemiah would never been able
There's
to
no
do it.
wall.
There's no wall, right? And there's soldiers and there's all these different roles.
Yeah.
And that's another very helpful thing too, because not everybody's going to start a business, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what you get a lot of times. You'll get, you start a Christian business. Well, yeah, if you can start a Christian business, go ahead and do it. But not everybody's going to do that. There's going to be workers too, and that's
Yeah.
completely fine. Nothing wrong with having a boss and working for someone else's company or do because the thing is, at the end of the day, we do have a mission, and Christ needs all kinds of people. And so I like to think about that stuff too when I'm reading these stories.
Yeah, that's good. No, I mean, it definitely sounds like you've mined a lot, so to speak, in the Old Testament, kind of gotten some gold there. So that's really good stuff. Speaking of just these topics, I think I am still unlearning just probably early stuff that I just maybe just thought of when I was first a Christian. Like when I was initially saved, when I thought about work and those sorts of things, my only real idea of it was like doing work in a Christian manner is doing it with integrity and honor, which is definitely true, but
Yeah, of course.
it's not the whole picture. There's doing work with excellent quality because we serve an excellent God. Think of the work in terms of putting the temple together in the Old Testament. Like the best craftsmen were used for it. So I think about things like that. I think about a little bit of what I know about the Proverbs, like the long term sort of planning aspect that goes into that, not just haphazardly working, but thinking with a purpose. Different seasons that come in, winter, harvest season, all that. So that is kind of come into play in terms of applying that. Like, where am I in my life? Why am I doing this job? Is there any long term utility to this job? Does this help
Yeah.
me? Does it help me potentially help a future family? All that kind of stuff. So, um, yeah, there's just a whole lot here, and I think there's just tons to think about.
I think Christians need to be a little bit more aware that it is okay to get your hands dirty. What I don't
Yeah,
mean by that is doing immoral stuff,
yeah,
but the reality is that in the United States, there's a lot of capital being put into very antichrist businesses and antichrist ideologies. A lot of capital.
yeah,
And the pagans are more than willing to put their own wealth on the line in order to promote their evil, right?
yeah,
And I think that Christians sometimes get this idea that, maybe putting their money on the line for good is somehow like unclean or like maybe
yeah.
feels like a bribe sort of. Um, but the reality is that's necessary too.
You mean
I've
like
talked to some guy.
investing your money in an upstart that you're not sure about, but it's like you think it's
Yeah.
to a good end. Is that like an example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. That's a good example. I mean, I think even politically as well, that's something that can be done as well. We always complain about all these politicians that are bought and paid for by these evil corporations. Um, we never think about buying and paying for politicians for good. Why
Mm,
not? Is that? I mean, I think some people would say that might be immoral. I'm not so sure it is, and so I think
mm.
we need to have some shrewdness to us as well about some of this stuff, and that's I think that's gonna move the needle more than we think it will, and we can do that for God's good purposes, and I don't think that's anything we should be ashamed of. So, but you can't do that without capital, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You can't do that
Realistic
without capital.
things come in. Yeah,
Yeah. So I like here's my thing, like we should be creating businesses, yes, but we should also be shrewd enough to be trying to create businesses not so that we can sell the business to a major competitor, right?
yeah,
We don't want to create like a Christian media company so we can sell to Disney.
yeah,
We want to buy Disney
yeah,
and create and change it. I mean, I always think about this. I go to Disney World, right, with my kids, and I just think to myself like, how awesome would this place be if it wasn't like so evil? You know what I mean?
yeah,
This would be
yeah. I
amazing.
mean, yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, 100%. It is. It's fascinating that it's in my lifetime, which is not that long, but in my lifetime, it has always felt to me that in terms of this sort of realm, like work and putting money to good purposes, those sorts of things, like at least from my perspective, Christians have always been on defense. Like
Yeah.
basically the cultural landscape around us is just constantly degrading.
Yes.
Every company is getting more immoral by the year. Every institution kind of gets more immoral by the year. But it's like and I'm guilty of this. I never stop to think about actually, what can I, in God's grace, be doing on a small level just to
Yeah.
be a solution? Like, can I even on a small level, as in two coffee choices. It costs a little bit higher here at you know this local coffee shop, but I know it's like run by a fairly solid person. It's a little higher than like Starbucks. I kind of want to go to Starbucks, but this might be a better. It's not sin to go to Starbucks, but it might be a wiser thing. Small, small acts on the smallest thing that like I can control as a Christian, like a Starbucks versus a local coffee shop that costs a little bit more. I'm prone to just go to Starbucks. Oh, and Starbucks is close to my house. And it's not sin to go to that Starbucks, but
Of course.
maybe there's some wisdom in thinking, oh, like this is run by someone who is at the very least more sympathetic to uh, decent values, and maybe
Yeah.
they're Christian, or they're just better than over here. This is probably
Yeah.
why. Or speaking of the coffee thing, maybe there's a Christian coffee company out there, and it's like, well, it does cost some for shipping, but maybe if we can budget it and we can talk, I can talk to my wife or whatever, like we can do this, and it's a small example of we don't have to just constantly give to evil all the time if there is a different option.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely businesses kind of springing up that that want to take advantage of that opportunity, and I think that's good. It's hard to do because we can't do everything. I mean,
Yeah,
we're decades away from the Christian company that has a smartphone. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that's not coming anytime soon. But you do the best you can. And you can see where you can maybe make some adjustments. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with thinking in those terms. Um, that's I think we should be thinking in those terms if at all possible.
yeah, yeah. So that's something I've thought about recently in terms of like, just it's so easy to be programmed to just constantly buy where you've always bought, like
Yep.
all the time, like same grocery stores that are really unchristian and anti-Christian a lot of times. Same movie theater, same, streaming service or whatever it is. And a lot of times it's like more and more, I think we have an
Yeah.
opportunity too with the age of the internet. There are actually different avenues to start pulling together more, I think, because
Yep.
people communicate more easily. Like 12 years ago, I probably couldn't really talk to you really well on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. That's right.
Like, so I think there's a huge, for lack of a better term, market for Christians being more self-aware of, oh, this is not a great place to really put my money. It's not sin, but there are better ways to potentially care for my kids and all that kind of stuff um, than that. So
Yeah, and the thing about that strategy is that it's not like a quick hit, right?
absolutely,
We're not gonna topple a company of these. I mean, these are major. I mean, a lot of the companies you're talking about, they're just humongous,
yes,
gigantic companies.
yeah,
We're not gonna topple those companies overnight, but sometimes it takes small changes like that, and in the aggregate, they can actually really make a difference. I think we saw a little bit of that with like the people protesting against Bud Light. I mean,
yeah,
that's not gonna bankrupt InBev, but
yeah,
it does hurt. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
even small percentage points dipped in sales is millions and millions and millions of dollars. That's a huge deal to them. Um, but that's a slow burn. It's not going to yield instant results.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. But it's worth doing everything you can. So,
I think so. Yeah, and one of the things I'm a recruiter in my normal business. I have a
yeah, I
recruiting
was gonna
company that
ask
I
kinda,
own,
yeah.
and I've been over time trying to do more business with at least companies that are somewhat aligned, like
Yeah.
maybe not maybe not owned by a Christian, but they're not caving to the craziness. You know what I mean? They're not
Yeah.
putting the pride flag on their icon on LinkedIn, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to do that. I still do work with some crazy companies. For the time being, I'm willing to take their money. It's fine.
Sure.
But that's just like plundering the Egyptians, right? Um, so
Yeah.
there's that. But again, like these are things that I don't think that we've really done a good job thinking through previously.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
as we move into this in society, there's a negative view of Christians now, and that's pretty
100%.
new.
Yeah.
That's pretty new. Like, I think Aaron Wren was the guy who came up with this, but It used to be positive view of Christians. That was positive world. Then it became like neutral. Like if you're a Christian or not, it wouldn't really matter. Like no one would promote you. No
Yeah,
one hated you. Now we're in this new space of negative world where
yeah,
if someone finds out you're a Christian, you get the sideways glances and all that kind of stuff. And so we haven't really been forced to think this through, but now we have to. We have to do it.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, 2020 and beyond was, especially that year particularly, was very much of an unmasking, I think, for a lot of
Ironically,
people. Yeah, I never thought about that.
as everybody's covering their face,
Yeah,
it was kind of an unmasking.
that's true. I did not think about that. Yeah, it was a figurative unmasking, a literal masking with like a space helmet on top for some. But you just saw more of like underlying values and underlying gods and underlying fears in all of that. And the things of first importance. I will go to my grave saying that ultimately we must preach the gospel and people must come to Christ through the knowledge. Well, people must come to Christ through hearing the good news about Christ.
Yep.
That being said, I think there have been areas like such as what we're talking about, work and maybe like a political philosophy, things such
Yeah.
as that, or even, details about, you know, effective ways to apply the scriptures in the realm of the family that have almost been seen, especially politics, it's seen as like almost dirty or icky or
Yep.
kind of out there. And because of that, I think one of the byproducts of that was not being prepared for like a 2020.
Yep.
And so, part of the reason I want to have conversations like this and,
Yeah.
learn about different things from scripture and people that I think have some good things to say is because of those sorts of things where
Yep.
it's like, man, I don't want to see that kind of a thing happen again. I know something will because people are sinful. But I would like for like a 2020 not to happen again where a lot of churches are just smacked with not being prepared from a like political theology standpoint
That's
or
right.
this or
Yeah.
that
We were
standpoint.
tested and we failed.
100%. Yes.
This is the thing. Like, you're so right about the gospel first importance. We want people to convert. And, you even see that with the Great Commission, our marching orders that Christ gave us, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's that's important, and it's right there. I think that what we often forget is the final words, where it's like, yeah, go baptize the nations, baptizing them, that's conversion, teaching them to observe everything I command.
Yeah.
And that part, I think we limit that to like your moral personal conduct.
Yeah.
And if you look at what Jesus taught, and we just said it, he's referencing Leviticus. He's a teacher of the law. He teaches these things. It's much more than just personal moral conduct.
Yeah.
Obviously, it starts there, and that's very important for everybody because that's the thing we have the most control over, like what we do when we're alone, right?
Yeah.
But the one thing in the garden that God made, that the one thing that wasn't good was that man was alone. We're not little islands.
Yeah.
We're in a community. And
100%.
so people, the gospel is good for people, but the gospel is good for people as people actually are, and they're in communities and
Yeah.
they form governments and they do these things. And it's so we need to teach everything Christ commands, including
Yeah.
the stuff about that, including how you relate to people in your work, including how you relate to people in your
Yeah.
politics, including all this stuff. So that's, I think you're so right. 2020 was a big test. We all failed,
Yeah.
and nobody gets a pass. You know what I mean? And so we need to we have a lot more work to do than we thought we did at the
Yeah.
time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, 100%. Like, yeah, a whole lot. And, you know, I mean, yeah, I think it's a good way to put it. For the most part, we all failed. Like we all, most churches closed for quite a long time.
Yeah,
And that should be one of the most basic things about knowing what the church is, and that a team of pastors should know is that somehow we need to be able to still gather. and we can
Yep.
even think wisely within the framework that we're in. We don't know how dangerous this is. We can even think wisely within this, but there are some non-negotiables that we should be theologically that shouldn't have even really crossed our mind.
Yeah.
But it did, and yeah, it was not good. But the Lord did sharpen a lot of people because of
Oh,
that. You know
absolutely.
what I
Yeah.
mean?
I did a video the other day, and I'm not going to name him because I don't want to throw shade,
Sure.
without any context. But somebody had said that, if the 2019 version of you would look at the 2023 version of you with horror, then you need to ask yourself some hard questions.
Yeah.
And
Hence.
I thought to myself, you know, 2019, he picked that date obviously because it was before COVID.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I gotta say, most people had no idea how bad things had gotten prior to 2020.
Yeah.
So the 2019 version of you had no clue what he was talking about. No clue.
Yeah. Maybe he could
And
learn
so
some things.
that does not mean you change for the better, but a lot of people are a lot more aware of what their things are now than they were then. And yeah, so maybe the 2019 version of 80 Robles would be horrified by the 2023 version, but that
Yeah.
guy was clueless. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? He didn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. It's like either one of those scenarios. It's like, I mean, one of them might be horrified. Let's just take both guys, which is the same guy. This is kind of weird, but
Yeah.
just go to the scriptures and see
That's
which
right.
one. You know what I
That was
mean?
the
Like
whole point.
that's kind of a weird thing.
That's why I thought that tweet was so stupid because the 2019 version of me is not the standard. That guy was a dope.
Yeah,
The
but the
2023
scriptures are.
version of me is not the standard either, actually,
Yeah,
because to be honest, I'm not so sure we still know how bad things are.
yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
Um, and so the standard, of course, is God's law and God's word, and that's where you need to that's we're discipling people with everything that Christ taught. That's what we should be. That's the standard, right? And so things like not meeting for church. I mean, that's just one of many examples you could have chosen, but it's a big one because it should be the most obvious.
yeah,
And it wasn't. And so we do actually need to ask ourselves some hard questions and figure out why it was that that wasn't obvious to us.
yeah,
And it's so funny because almost to the man, you can find examples from 2018 or 2017 about how central the worship service is and how important it is and how video church doesn't count. Like you
yeah,
can find example after example, and then the same people in 2020 saying, hey, video church, totally, you know what I mean? Like we love it, you know what I mean? Um,
yeah. That
and so
is
anyway, all that to say is, look, nobody's perfect.
absolutely not. Yeah,
Nobody's perfect even now. But we do need to learn and we do need to figure out in the here and now. Because look, I hate to say it this way. It sounds so it kind of sounds sacrilegious, but look, we're Christians. We have our ticket punched. Christ has saved us, and He's not going to let us go.
yeah,
Okay, but we're still here, so we need to figure out what to do here.
yeah, yeah,
Because people like to say, "This is Earth is not my home." I'm going to heaven one day. Well, there might be some truth to that, but actually, this is your home now because God put you here now. He gave
yeah,
you this home now. And so we need to take care of this home now. Even if this is not your ultimate home, you still got work to do now.
yeah. And even, I mean, really, even how do you lay up treasures in heaven? It is by honoring God
Amen.
here. And so it's not, and we talk about economics here. It's not acquiring wealth just to store it up like the fool who stored his wealth in the barn, but it is, you know, taking the gifts and talents and spiritual gifts that God has given you if you're in Christ, and honoring the Lord with them and being, a word that we may throw around sometimes, but it's a legit word biblically, being a steward.
Yeah.
I only have one life, but I can give it for Christ's purposes, and part of that purpose is being a good, brother to my sister and being a good pastor, to those in my care and so on and so forth. If you're married, a good husband that cares for his wife and provides for his wife, protects and father to children and so on and so forth. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not escapists, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Let me say this too. One thing I will recommend. I don't know when you're going to upload this, but
Right
at
next
some
week.
point, in the next couple months, Joel Webbin from Right Response Ministries is going to be releasing a 9-part series with myself, with him, and a man named Andrew Isker. He's a
Okay.
minister in Minnesota, and Andrew wrote a book called the Bonfice Option. You can get that book right now on Amazon, called the Bonfice Option, and it is a fantastic book. And in it, he talks about all of this kind of thing. It's not just about economics, but there is some economics in there. There's a lot of different stuff in there about how to remember that, God does have work for you here. You know what I mean? Um, and one of the things that we talked about, sorry, this is a sidetrack, but he talked about in the book, how difficult it is for a lot of younger men to buy a house right now.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's hard to marry, number one. And
Yeah.
once you do, it's hard to buy a house, and it's hard to kind of fill it with children.
Yep.
And in the book, he makes the case that this is intentionally done. This has been intentionally done by evil people at the top. And they've created a situation where it's really hard to do normal things like
Yeah.
50 years ago. And
Yeah.
so anyway, when you have this kind of a mindset that God has work for you here, and he wants to you to leave an inheritance to your children's children. Yes, it's a spiritual inheritance, but it's also physical. He starts talking about things like, if you're a boomer, let's say, yeah, you were able to buy a house when you were young, and it took hard work, and nobody's taking that away from you. These days, it takes hard work, and it's much harder than it was before.
Yeah.
The prices are exorbitant, and so here's something you could do. You could help your kids with
Yeah.
buying a house. You could give them some money. You can lend them some money. And I was like, that really spoke to me. Not because I'll never forget this. When I was a young man, I didn't have a family yet, but I heard a story about my own father, and about how his father, my grandfather, lent him money to buy their first house. And, it was a kinda loan that, like, every Christmas, like, he knocked off, like, half of it kinda thing, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't really a loan, it was like a gift, but he made it
Yeah.
like a loan, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, when I heard that story as a young man, it blew my mind because I didn't know people did that.
Wow.
I like and when I heard Andrew talking about this, I was like, "Isn't this the way it should be?" Like, why was my mind blown? That it made me sad
Yeah.
that my mind was so shocked that
Yeah.
my grandfather had done that. It made me sad that, like, I didn't know that was a common thing, like, but these are
Mm.
the things that families do for each other, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so, you should do that. Sure, you when you were a kid, you picked yourself up by your bootstraps, fine, but that doesn't mean you can't help now, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, things like even small things like that, which, maybe it's not a small thing, that's, down
That was a
payments
big
are
thing.
expensive these days. It's a big thing, but, like, that can set your kids up
Yeah.
so well. And I know my father's plans for his current house, and his plans are to give it to us and all this kind of stuff. And these are things that please God. These are things that God talks about in his word. Um, and we should not forget them. Even if we
Yeah.
think, I don't know what everyone in this audience's eschatology is. Even if you think you're going to fly away,
I have no
in
idea,
a few
to be
years.
honest.
Yeah, that's fine.
What my audiences is, but I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like, even if you think that, the rapture's coming or whatever, like, it doesn't matter. You still have work to do now. The
Yeah.
the the, the proverb still applies to you. A righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And so I think financially and economically, you should be operating every day thinking about, God willing, you have grandchildren, you get to see them, being able to leave something to them,
Yeah.
that they can use to sort of take dominion and really conquer this world, because that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah. And, kind of to put a bow on a lot of this, because, I'm sure we both got to get going here soon. Like, it's funny as we speak about this, we're assuming, and those who listen to this, I am assuming, as I imagine my guest is, that idolatry of money is off the table, or idolatry of accumulating wealth, or whatever, or idolatry of children, any of these things. But it is so fascinating that I just think we're prone to think that, honoring Christ and providing for your family, for example, are like somehow not
Yeah,
in the same on the same road. They're not one
yeah,
of the same, because there's more to honoring Christ than just that. But like, in providing for my family, in going to work however many hours a week, and working my schedule so I can also see my kids 4 nights a week and go to his baseball game, all that, whatever it is, I am honoring Christ.
Amen.
because that's what he's, you know what I
Amen.
mean? So like we're talking about all this stuff way up in the air, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, no, it is about honoring Christ, but it's about honoring Christ in the ways that he has providentially put me in and instructed us in the word. And part of that is, what's right in front of me, this area, my family, or whatever it is. So
Amen, dude. You put it exactly perfectly. That is so true. And I encourage all of your listeners, read the Proverbs, man. You can just
yeah,
read them, and you don't have to really study them. You can just read them like you would read a book, like a normal, like a novel. And I think that if you do that enough, you're gonna disavow yourself of all this nonsense, because you see things in that, like the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the righteous,
yeah,
stuff like
general
that.
rule, because he's
You
going to
see things
squander
like
it.
that's right. You see things like diligent hands, it leads to wealth. Slack hands lead to poverty.
Yeah,
These are things that all of that stuff that you were saying, kind of like, sometimes Christians feel like, "Hey, getting money, like, is this dirty? Is this bad? Is this wrong?" You read the Proverbs, and you will be cleansed of all of that, because it doesn't allow you to worship money, but it also doesn't allow you to completely neglect it, because that's also sinful. It's just sinning in a different way.
that's a
Um,
good point. Because if you're
so
if you are forsaking something that God has maybe put for you to be in charge of or
as a
something,
tool, yeah.
someone else who's not of God is going to take that and use it for not good purposes.
Amen.
Uh,
That's exactly right. And so Proverbs, man, you asked for like recommendations of the Old
yeah.
Testament. If I was like maybe intimidated a little bit by Leviticus, because Leviticus, I'll be honest, like, you can't read it like a novel necessarily.
Oh no.
Um, but you do have to have some help there. But like Proverbs, you can, and there's so much good stuff in there. Like I said, I've been reading it with my 8-year olds, and my 8, 6, and 4-year old, and they understand it from a very like kid perspective, but
Yeah.
um, it's just been awesome.
Yeah. Well, yeah, AD, I really appreciate your time, man. Usually, like when I've interviewed people, I've done a few now. I'm very regimented with the questions, but I thought I wasn't like usually I'm interviewing someone on a book they wrote or something like that. So I have a bit
Yeah, yeah,
organizational thing. So thank you for staying somewhat on track with me. And last question, speaking of books, because I want you to plug something. I know you've written at least a book before.
yeah. That's
Um,
right.
so what is your book called, or if you only have one, I don't know, but
Yeah, it's
where can
just the
people
one.
find it?
Yeah, the book I wrote is called Social Justice Pharisees. And it is basically about the problems with the social justice movement, like the woke church movement, and very basic, easy to understand biblical answers to it.
Yeah,
So I basically break down the problem, and I show you biblically why they're wrong. It's very simple, and it's stuff that everybody really knows, but sometimes they forget to apply it to this, because this is such an emotionally charged issue.
yeah,
Um, and so a lot of people have found it helpful. It's very easy to read. That's kind of my style. Um, and so you can pick that up on Amazon if you so choose. Um, I will say this though: if I had to buy one book, I
okay.
would not buy my book. I would buy the Bonfice option. It
Wow,
is it
what a
is similar.
switcheroo.
I'm telling you, man. I get no financial gain from this,
Yeah,
but I found it so helpful. It's another one of these books that's like very easy to read. He's not using like high academic, this guy is like a walking encyclopedia, but he doesn't write that way. You know what I mean? Um, I think you'll really enjoy it. And for me personally, it helped me connect a lot of like
hmm,
things that were happening in 2020 and in the recent years. It helped me connect them all and figure out exactly what's going on and how to day to day confront
yeah,
it.
that is
So anyway,
fascinating.
yeah, I know that's not exactly what you asked me. You asked me to plug something for myself. Feel free to buy my
Yeah,
book too. But if I had to buy one, it'd be that one. It's just
okay.
very helpful.
Well, I've got a description I can use and maybe a pinned comment or something. Provide
Yeah.
links to both.
And Andrew's pretty generous with his time too. So if you ever wanted to maybe interview him, I'm sure he'd be glad to. He goes by Boniface Option on Twitter.
Okay, maybe I'll look him up. I've seen a picture of him. The mustache.
Yeah, he looks like Mike Ditka.
Oh man, I mean, he could fight an army just himself with that thing. I mean, he doesn't
He's
even need to
also
use
he's
words.
also huge too.
Is
Like
he
he's like
okay?
a very big person. Uh,
Yeah, great mustache comes great responsibility. That's I
yeah,
heard
that's
that
right.
said once. But yeah, I will. I love to see like pictures and think, oh, that'd be a cool album picture for some reason. I do the same thing with book titles. Like I think, oh, this is gonna be a great book. So that's an intriguing title. His is as well as yours is like
Yeah,
I know what the book's about and I like it.
yeah,
Social justice Pharisees that describes that time specifically when it was more relevant, like in terms
yeah.
of 3 4 years ago, though it still is.
Yeah, it
Like
still is, but yeah, it was more relevant back then.
it
I
was
agree.
like everyone had you in order to be loving your neighbor, you have to be social justice minded,
Oh, I
which
talked
is
about that one, and that's like one of the chapters in the book. Love your neighbor. Yeah, for sure.
it's yeah, I don't want to get too into it, but I just found that to be like it's one thing to tell someone you must homeschool your kids or like you're in sin and it's like okay, you're going too far. It might
Yeah,
be wiser for a lot of people to do that, but I'm not going to tell you to do that.
yeah,
You can do what you want. And
yeah,
so, you're telling someone to do something good or they're in sin, but it's not necessary. Like, but the Phariseeism of social justice was like a level deeper because you're telling me to sin,
yeah. Yep, that's right.
or I'm not loving my neighbor. That was what was so much of it was crazy. But that was one of the
Yeah.
things that was so frustrating. It's like stop telling me to do evil.
That's exactly right. Yeah, honestly, just like the Pharisees, evil that like looked good
Yeah.
at the time, kind of thing. Yeah. Did you? So, it sounded like you might have been familiar with Saint Boniface. Do you know the story of Saint Boniface?
Mm-mm.
So
No.
here's the story. So I didn't know it either at the time. So the reason why it's called the Boniface option is there was a saint who who basically like was he was the first to preach the gospel to this certain tribe in Germany that was very pagan and very like stout. Like they had resisted like the Roman occupation. Like they were not having anything. You know what I mean? Like nobody could conquer them. Anyway, so he started to make a few converts or whatever, and they had this tree that they would all worship at. And the legend of the tree was that if you touched it, that Thor would strike you down with lightning, right?
Hmm.
So Saint Boniface goes to the tree and he says, everyone's gathered around. He says, "Look, I'm going to come back to this tree tomorrow, and not only am I going to touch it, but I'm going to chop it down." So everyone gathers the next day because they fully expect that the demon is going to strike him down, kind of thing that that they call Thor. And so he swings the axe and he hits the tree, but he's not able to chop it down. Like he
Yep.
just kind of bruises the tree. And the legend goes that right as he swung the axe, a big wind from heaven came and just uprooted it and knocked it over.
Hmm.
And that like that's how that tribe converted. Essentially, they all said, "Oh my
Oh
goodness, like
wow.
Thor isn't real." You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or he is real, but he's just impotent.
Yeah.
Um, So that's the story of Saint Boniface. And then after that, he basically he did all the administrative work of setting up all of these new churches and setting up, elders and organizing everything. So the whole point of the Boniface option is okay, we've got this world and there's trees, there's pagan trees all around.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we got to knock them down, and it gives you strategies for doing that. And then it says we also have to do the kind of the more mundane stuff afterwards of building,
Yeah.
building, communities and things like that. So it gives you strategies for doing that. So it's like
Yeah.
both sides of the Boniface story, the amazing kind of chopping down the idol and then also the building are necessary right now. I'm telling you, I'm gonna text
Sounds
Andrew
good.
in a minute. I'm say, a guy on a podcast interview told me to plug my book, but I just plugged yours instead.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'll
Yeah.
put that in the description. I'll pin a tweet of yours,
Yeah.
for sure. So they both sound good. But yeah, it's again, like I said, picture I've seen of him, mustache looks substantial, but he
Oh
sounds
yeah.
very smart. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
well, AD, I don't want to take too much of your time. Like I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, would love to talk to you again at some point.
All right, man. God bless.
Have a good one. Hi, this is John with Wisdom for the Church. Please subscribe below, and I hope you enjoyed that video.